Hey folks, welcome to PRIMO NUTMEG. I'm your host Steve. By the way, if you are a regular listener, please do like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to us on both YouTube and iTunes. Today on the show, I have an anti-war activist who made headlines in 2005 for protesting George W. Bush. This is Casey Sheehan. Cindy has had a lengthy anti-war activist career. She's also ran for vice president of the United States with Roseanne Barr in 2012. So I'm going to talk to her about the past 10 years of protesting against war, both during the Bush and Obama administrations, and what she thinks of the 2016 election. So please stay tuned. Well, Cindy, I want to thank you for being here on PRIMO NUTMEG. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I really did just want to go over your entire career as an anti-war activist. You know, you actually are a hero of mine. You're somebody who drew me into the anti-war movement in 2005. And I think a lot of people, as well as the country kind of stood up against the Iraq war and the Bush administration. You know, you were really a big figurehead of that. So I did just want to go over, how that all started. And, unfortunately, that did start with what happened to your son, Casey. So I was wondering if maybe you could just speak about Casey and, what happened to him.
Right. So Casey joined the military in the year 2000. He was just finishing up an associate in arts degree at the local community college. He was 21. He was recruited at a jobs fair at his community college. And so he had resisted for many years joining the military because we live near an Air Force base, and he's, been actively recruited since, 15 or 16 years old. And at the time when he was talking to an Army recruiter, he was kind of in limbo, wanting to go on to university, working full-time, going to school full-time. And he was lured by the promises of a free education and signing bonuses and job training and things like that. And the one thing the recruiter told him that Casey told me, because I was pretty upset when he joined the military, when he joined the Army, was, "Don't worry, Mom," my recruiter, I don't remember his name, but he said, my recruiter, Sergeant so-and-so, said that even if there were a war, I wouldn't have to fight because I scored so high on my ASVAB tests. And, ASVAB tests are the military kind of like job placement tests. And, right. He was promised to be a chaplain's assistant, which is what he really wanted to do. But when he got to basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, he was told, "Oh, guess what? That MOS, that's the specialty, is filled, so you can be a Humvee mechanic or a cook." And so he chose to be a Humvee mechanic. He really hated being a mechanic. He didn't really like being in the military, but, he was kind of that kind of person who said, well, I signed up for it. I'm going to fulfill my duty. And then when 9/11 happened, and then the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, he really was against those military misadventures. And when he was scheduled to go to Iraq in 2004, he said he didn't want to go, but he had to go. And the sooner he went, the faster he would be back, but he wouldn't have to kill anybody. And a few days after he got to Iraq, he was forced to go into combat. He told his sergeant, who literally dragged him onto the truck to go into combat, he said, "I'm a mechanic. I'm not going. I'm not going to do this." He was forced to do it, and then he was dead. So he was only actually in Iraq for a few days before he was killed.
Well, it is a very tragic story, and, it is sad that happened to Casey.
A tragic story, but a heroic story, because,
absolutely.
No matter how wrong the wars still are, no matter how the motives and the lies and the forces behind war profiteering and dominance, the psychopathic dominance is, a lot of the people in the military, their motivations are much higher and much better than the people who send them to die. Some of them, many of them are just, war criminals, psychopaths, like the politicians and generals and other officers.
And, that's really what you focused on, it seemed like, when you went down to George W. Bush's ranch and started Camp Casey. Can you talk a little bit about what your motivation was for doing that and what it was like?
Well, that was actually 11 years ago this month. Well, actually in August. I can't believe it's already September. I'm still behind. But it was in 2000. My son was killed in 2004, and I actually started speaking out and reaching out to other anti-war people and anti-war groups in 2004. And I did many, many things in 2004 before 2005 when I went to Crawford in August. I founded a group called Gold Star Families for Peace. And I was traveling around the country, speaking out, going to rallies and,
right.
Things like that. But in August of 2005, I was actually at home, and I had been very, very busy up until then, traveling all over the country. And so I was home, and I was sitting in my living room. I was actually going to Dallas, Texas the next day to participate in the Veterans for Peace National Convention that just happened to be scheduled in Dallas, and I happened to be going. And I was watching the news, and George Bush was on, and he said that 11 Marines had been killed that day in Iraq, and they were from a reserve Marine group. I don't know what the divisions are, battalion, whatever. I don't know that kind of stuff. But they were from a Marine Reserve group in Ohio, and 11 of them had been killed in Iraq. And so George Bush was already in Texas on vacation. He was at some press availability, and one of the media people asked him about that incident that killed the 11 Marines, and he said something, but then he said, the families of the fallen can rest assured that their loved ones died for a noble cause. And I, with bated breath, I waited for one of the, sycophantic media to ask him, what is the noble cause? And they didn't. So I was thinking, well, heck, I'm going to Texas tomorrow anyway. After I'm finished at the convention, I'll just go to Crawford, no matter where it is, and ask George Bush to define the noble cause that killed my son and, so many other troops in Iraqi. And so that's what happened. And then during the convention in Dallas, some people from the Crawford Peace House came, and I didn't even really know there was a Crawford Peace House, but they came to the convention in Dallas, and one of the founders, Hadi Jawad, said, Cindy, what are you going to do if he doesn't meet with you? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll just sit on the street and say I'm not going to move until he meets with me. And Hadi looked at me. He said, wow, that's an action. And so he didn't meet with me, and it did turn into quite an action.
Right, and you did start getting a lot of media attention from that.
Yes, absolutely.
So can you speak to how that happened? I mean, what did the media show up immediately, or did groups like Move On and Answer and United for Peace and Justice?
Well, the groups that I had been working with closely prior to Camp Casey were Veterans for Peace, Iraq Vets Against the War, Military Families Speak Out, and Code Pink. And so Veterans for Peace, I was at the convention, so many of them came with me, but only 8 of us spent the first night. And then the next night there was like 30, and the night after that there was 100, and then it just kept growing and growing and growing. But anyway, the media, and I did not know this before Camp Casey, but the media, the White House press corps actually follows the president wherever he goes. And so even if he's on vacation in Crawford, Texas, they are there. And there's really nothing to do while he's on vacation except watch him clear brush. So it was actually very serendipitous that the first day we had almost the entire press corps there to follow our, we marched from this point on Prairie Chapel Road to, it was about, I would say about 1.5 miles to the first checkpoint of the Bush Ranch. And so we were marching down there, about 80 of us, and the press corps was following, taking pictures, and we were stopped and turned away. So that's where, we made our stand and I said, I'm not leaving until he meets with me. But then it just like went, if there was such a thing as Facebook or Twitter, back in those days there wasn't, it went viral all over the internet. And I had put out a press release before I went, saying what I was going to do. And I unfortunately put my own phone number on it. So after that first night, I could not keep up with the calls. And so thank goodness some people some activists from Code Pink came on Monday, and they took my phone and they started making some organization out of all the media requests and things like that. So
that's great.
And then not only the press corps was there, but of course media outlets from all over the world started to show up, along with activists and interested people from mostly, of course, from the United States, but we had some from as far away as Australia.
Yeah, I actually found out about you because I was a student journalist at the time. And you actually came up here to New Haven, Connecticut. It probably was about 11 years ago this month. And there was an event in New Haven, and I covered that. And then I remember hearing after that there was going to be a giant march down in Washington in late September of 2005.
Right.
And I ended up going down there, and I remember seeing you with the Reverend Jesse Jackson and 200,000 other people. What are your memory of that march? Because that march specifically, I remember hearing that was the biggest anti-war march since the Vietnam War.
My memory of it was that there were several 100,000 people there, and it was kind of scary because there was such a crush around me. There was one point where the police almost had to pull me out because I was being crushed against a fence, but they were able to get the people to move back and stuff. Everybody wanted to, shake my hand or hug me, which is great, but, there's just so many people. And I thought it was really an historic thing to
Certainly.
be part of. And I got to speak unfortunately, there was a division in the anti-war movement. So there was kind of like two things going on at the time.
Right, and
one
that was between,
Answer,
and the other was United for Peace and Justice.
Yeah, so I spoke at both of their events, and we had a Camp Casey kind of set up on the mall where we brought tents and we brought the crosses that we had at Camp Casey. So I was able to meet a lot of people out there, and I think it was something very great to be part of. And then on Monday, of course, some of us did a sit-in front of the White House, and like almost 400 of us were arrested that day. And so that was the first time I ever got arrested. So, and then there hasn't been any comparable anti-war protests since then.
Right. And I do want to kind of talk about, how it broke apart and how it fell apart, because, after that, I kept going and covering other smaller anti-war protests. Like I remember there was one in Hartford in, I think it was early 2006. And what I sort of noticed is slowly, gradually, Democratic politicians started showing up. And then here in Connecticut in 2006, Joe Lieberman actually got primaried by someone named Ned Lamont, and he won the Democratic nomination. And then the Republicans ended up backing Joe Lieberman and throwing their own candidate, Alan Schlesinger, under the bus. But, I'm kind of interested in your perspective of this, because you were really a leader of the anti-war movement when it was authentic. And then something, happened with these different groups I don't know if it involved Answer and United for Peace and Justice, if it was something involving that split or something involving MoveOn.org or just the Democrats themselves coming in. But somehow we got from this call to end war and end occupations to the Barack Obama administration. So what is your perspective? How did that happen over the course of those few years?
Well, it went during that time in D.C. before the march. I met with so many politicians, Congress people and senators, and not just Democrats, but also Republicans. But the Democrats were very, like, I met with Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, and many others. And I had been working with some of them before. There was something called the Out of Iraq Caucus, and I had done things with them before Camp Casey. So I already knew people like Lynn Woolsey and John Conyers and Barbara Lee and Maxine Waters and Cynthia McKinney. I had worked with them a lot. But anyway, the Democrats, I really think that bottom line, MoveOn.org and Daily Kos and to some extent United for Peace and Justice, because United for Peace and Justice is mostly run by people from the Communist Party. The Communist Party have long been collaborationists with the Democratic Party. And so I didn't know any of these things before. I just thought all these people wanted the wars to end like I did. And so I think that the Democrats, they told me to my face, including up to Nancy Pelosi, who was at that time House Minority Leader. She said, Cindy, if you help us get the House of Representatives back in 2006, we'll help you end the wars. And so it wasn't like my major focus of getting Democrats elected, because I was super busy, that following after Camp Casey up until like 2008. But the Democrats did get elected. I did do a lot of rallies and things with them. And like you said, they started to show up at our rallies to kind of exploit the anti-war sentiment, which was huge at that time. And so one of the first things they did as the newly elected majority in the House was to start approving war funding for George Bush's wars against Iraq and Afghanistan. And Nancy Pelosi, of course, during that entire campaign she was using the energy of the anti-war movement, but almost slapping us in the face, saying like impeachment's off the table, and things like that. And we have to support the troops and blah, blah, blah. So I left the Democratic Party in 2007. And that's like when I lost a lot of backing in the groups that I had been working with. And even though MoveOn.org, Daily Kos, and organizations like that are just, they're just shills for the Democratic Party, they do have a lot of membership. They have a lot of pull and a lot of influence. And when the Democrats came into power in 2008, it was the 5th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, and Answer has a big presence in Washington, D.C. They reached out to me. I was running against Nancy Pelosi at the time, and they said, we have to have a big rally in Washington, D.C. because it's the 5th anniversary. And so the United for Peace and Justice their position was, no, we can't have a big rally because that would embarrass the Democrats and that would harm the chances of a Democratic president being elected in 2008. And so the organization I mentioned that I had worked with before, Iraq Vets Against the War, decided they would have a Winter Soldier event in Washington, D.C., and there would be no anti-war marches at all, and the Winter Soldier would be the only thing that would be happening that year. And so then Barack Obama becomes elected. When the Democrats regained control of the House in 2006, and they were sworn in beginning of 2007, that really put a huge damper on the anti-war movement. That when Barack Obama was elected, it practically killed it.
And as an outside observer, it seems to me that this same thing happened with both the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street. With the Tea Party, it seemed to spring out of the Ron Paul campaign in 2008, and it was really sort of a libertarian, small government tax revolt. And then Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck and Fox News, it seemed to co-opt it. And the same thing happened with Occupy Wall Street. And it seems like, that led to Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders just endorsed Hillary Clinton as the president of the United States. So, it's really disillusioning.
I'd like to say, too, that the Black Lives Matter movement, one of the self-described leaders of it, Sean King, just wrote a strong piece about why we should vote for Hillary Clinton.
It seems like whenever we have a genuine grassroots movement, it gets co-opted. And, you're someone who really saw that firsthand, who saw a personal experience where you went out there, you protested the president of the United States, you got all this media attention, you got this movement, and you were a major figurehead of the anti-war movement, and it got pulled away from you by the establishment. And this seems to happen again and again. So, I mean, how do we fight that? How do we make sure that doesn't happen the next time there's a genuine movement?
Well, that's the thing. Before Occupy Wall Street happened, do you remember Wisconsin?
Yes.
And so I was very ill at the time. I had a horrible, some kind of respiratory infection or whatever, and I was watching it happen, and I was sending out pleas to the people, like, don't let it get co-opted by the Democrats. The Democrats in the Wisconsin legislature weren't favorable to the protests against Scott Walker and against the tax on labor, if you remember. And so I said, just like, your movement is great. It has a lot of influence, but it has to stay nonpartisan. You have to focus on your cause. You have to focus on your demands. And so where did that movement get funneled? That movement got funneled into recalling Scott Walker and recalling Republicans who voted with Scott Walker in the attack on labor. And where did that get them? They failed. And so in Occupy Wall Street, I've worked with Occupy Wall Street in Sacramento, and we tried to have the same cautionary wisdom to these movements, but it seems like, they're very insidious. First of all, we saw how Move On took over Occupy Wall Street with their American Spring failure. But, I mean, it was a success in the fact that it was to support Democrats and not to support the demands of Occupy Wall Street. So I really, excuse me, I don't know how we can prevent these movements from being co-opted when the propaganda and the attraction of power is so strong. I was able to reject it. I was able to say I would rather be able to look at myself in the mirror and stay true to my principles than to be co-opted by people that don't have the same principles as I do.
That's why I say you're a hero of mine.
But then look at, I have been marginalized by these same people, but that doesn't mean what I did and what I'm still doing is wrong. It means that it's right.
Absolutely.
And so that it's just really difficult because, you know, these people that are in power have had decades and decades of preparation. They're standing on the shoulders of the people who did it before them, and they're fine tuning their propaganda and their means of control. They've just been so fine tuned that it's hard to be able to resist it.
So, you know, I've had some third-party candidates on the show. I recently had Jill Stein. Before that, I had John McAfee, who was running for the Libertarian nomination. You actually were the vice presidential nominee for the Peace and Freedom Party in 2012. And running with Roseanne Barr. That just seems like a very interesting thing to me. I'm just wondering if you could briefly touch on that campaign and what that was like running with a celebrity for this minor party.
Well, it was actually quite I still have post-traumatic stress disorder over that. And the Peace and Freedom Party, I'm still a member of it, but I've kind of broken ranks with Roseanne Barr because she's actually broken ranks with the party and what we stand for. But I ran for governor in 2014 with the Peace and Freedom Party, governor of California. And it just seems like the energy for third parties is greater right now than it was before. Definitely. when I ever ran. But I look at electoral politics as an expression of my opposition to the empire and to what the Democrats and Republicans do. I don't see it as a way of gaining political power. I see it as a way of expressing dissent. And I think, you know, I like Jill Stein. You know, I know her. I've done events with her before. I like the Green Party and the Green Party values. But I see it more as, they think that it's more of gaining political power than as an expression of dissent, because you don't see anything really happening between presidential elections with the Green Party. So I don't think I'll ever run for another political office. I'm not going to say never because I already said never, and I've run 2 times since I said never. But I don't think that's where change is going to happen, especially in the presidential elections, that we are so far away from electing a third party or independent candidate for president of the United States. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. So I think we have to do more. What my runs for Congress, I ran for Congress against Pelosi. Like you said, I ran for vice president. I ran for governor. What they have shown me is that your organization has to be community based, and you have to be working for solutions that are going to help you in your community and hope that spreads in a horizontal way. Because right now at this point, with, like I talked about, how the establishment has fine-tuned and sharpened their tools of oppression and propaganda, I don't think we really have a chance to gain power politically that way.
I just want to ask you, though, because, you know, I've had Noam Chomsky on the show, and he said things like, I voted for Jill Stein in Massachusetts, but in swing states, you need to vote for Hillary Clinton. And I've had other people on the show and people who've even criticized me for criticizing Hillary Clinton, saying you shouldn't do that because Donald Trump is this terrible neo-fascist, and he represents all that's evil in the world. And even though Hillary Clinton supported wars, all politicians support wars. So we should really just shut up and elect Hillary Clinton and not be concerned about that in this election. What is your response to that argument?
My response to that argument is absolute BS. I think that Donald Trump has had some rhetoric, and I wrote a piece recently. I said, why is his rhetoric so scrutinized and analyzed when her actual policies have been sanitized. And I absolutely do not agree with Noam Chomsky and other people on this lesser evilism voting. And I think that it's destructive. I think that liberals who put the blame on people who have true principles and who refuse to vote for people who are so against what we stand for, I think that they're actually part of the problem. And the reality is either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump are going to be president. It doesn't matter one way or other who we vote for. And so we have to, I believe, we have to stay true to our own principles and our own ethics and our own morals and not participate in supporting either candidate. And I just think right now, if you're going to support Hillary Clinton, that means that you actually support war. You support empire, no matter what you say. Because Hillary Clinton she was the most hawkish person running for the nomination of either party. And she's far more hawkish than Donald Trump.
I could not agree more. Well, Cindy, we're almost out of time here. I did want to ask you briefly, though, could you tell us about some of your new projects that you're working on?
Well, my overwhelming project for the last year and a half has been caregiver for my sister Dee Dee, who has stage 4 breast cancer.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I still have Cindy Sheehan Soapbox. It's a podcast and a blog. It's at cindysheehansoapbox.com. And I've had my podcast since 2009, so I have hundreds of archived shows. I've had Noam Chomsky on before, like you mentioned, but many, many wonderful guests and authors and activists. So go to cindysheehansoapbox.com, to check out my show and my blog. And I'm just hoping that if my sister, however her condition is resolved, that we'll be able to, because she was also not just my sister, but my assistant, my colleague, my comrade. Ever since my son has been killed, she co-founded Gold Star Families for Peace with me, is that whomever is elected in January, that people finally get that it's not who sits in the White House, it's the way the U.S. oppresses and kills people all over the world. Of course, it didn't happen in 8 years. Barack Obama has been a very enthusiastic war criminal since he's been elected. So I just, no matter what, I get up and I think, what can I do today to make the world a better place?
That is an excellent philosophy. And, I really do want to thank you again for all that you've done for the anti-war movement and for standing your ground, for being a really principled human being. I think that you are really a model for a lot of other people out there. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, fans, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening. Please do check out Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox. And please do also listen to other episodes of Primo Nutmeg and stay tuned for more. Until next time.